The key no longer fit. That was the first sign. For Clara Ellis, her life in the sun-drenched hills of Bel Air was perfect. A sprawling mansion, a handsome husband, Marcus Thorne, and a baby on the way. She thought she had it all. But on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in front of her own front door, with a useless piece of brass in her hand, she discovered her perfect life was a meticulously crafted lie. The house wasn't just locked, it was sold. And the man she loved, the father of her unborn child, was the one who had sold it right out from under her, leaving her pregnant, homeless, and with nothing but the designer clothes on her back. This isn't a fairy tale. This was the story of how one woman's world was shattered by the ultimate betrayal, and how her rescue came from the most unexpected and powerful man in the city. The Californian sun had a way of making everything look like a postcard. It gilded the marble entryway of the Thorne residence, made the azure water of the infinity pool sparkle, and cast long, dramatic shadows from the cypress trees lining the driveway. For Clara Ellis, this postcard had been her reality for the past 5 years. She'd married Marcus Thorne, the charismatic heir to the Thorne Legacy Corp. A man whose smile was as polished as his Italian leather shoes. Their life was a whirlwind of charity galas, weekend trips to Napa, and quiet evenings where the biggest decision was which Michelin-starred restaurant to order from. Clara, a talented art historian, had put her career on hold, believing she was building something more profound, a family. And now, at 29, she was 6 months pregnant with their first child, a son. The nursery was almost complete. It was a masterpiece of muted earth tones, with a custom-built crib and a hand-painted mural of a gentle forest scene. Clara spent hours in there, folding tiny clothes, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. But lately, a subtle chill had begun to seep into her perfect world, a draft coming from a crack she couldn't quite locate. Marcus was distant. He'd always been ambitious, but this was different. He'd come home late, smelling of expensive whiskey, and a faint, unfamiliar perfume. Something sharp and floral, nothing like her own subtle vanilla scent. He'd brush it off as client dinners and late-night strategy sessions. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually in his pocket, screen down. Just a big deal at work, Ames, he'd said, last night, his eyes not quite meeting hers. It's taking everything I've got, but it'll all be worth it. For us. For the baby. She had wanted to believe him, desperately. She blamed her unease on pregnancy hormones, the nesting instinct making her overly sensitive. That Tuesday, she'd gone for her routine obstetrician appointment. The doctor, a warm woman named Dr. Lena Hansen, had shown her the baby's strong heartbeat on the ultrasound monitor. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was a powerful anchor in the swirling sea of her anxieties. Filled with renewed hope, she'd stopped at a boutique on Rodeo Drive and bought a tiny pair of sneakers, a ridiculously extravagant purchase that made her smile. She pulled her white Range Rover into the familiar driveway at 3 in the afternoon, humming along to the radio. And that's when she saw it. Stuck into the manicured lawn, just to the right of the prize-winning rose bushes, was a sign. A real estate sign. It was bold red, and had one word that made the air rush from her lungs: sold. For a moment she thought it was a prank, a tasteless, elaborate joke by one of Marcus's wealthy friends. She parked the car, her heart beginning a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with her baby's steady beat. She walked to the sign, touching the cold, impersonal plastic. Sold by Sterling Properties. She didn't recognize the name. A wave of nausea sharper than any morning sickness she'd experienced washed over her. She fumbled in her Hermes purse for her keys, her hands shaking. She walked up the stone steps to the heavy oak door she had walked through 1,000 times. She slid the key into the lock. It wouldn't turn. She tried again. Nothing. It was as if the lock had been changed. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her denial. She pressed the doorbell, the familiar chimes echoing strangely from within the silent house. No one answered. She knocked her fist, thudding against the solid wood. Marcus. Is anyone home? Her voice was thin, fragile. She pulled out her phone to call him, but a black Rolls-Royce Ghost purred up the driveway and came to a stop behind her Range Rover. The driver's side door opened and Marcus got out. He was dressed in a tailored Tom Ford suit, looking every bit the powerful executive. But his face was a cold, unreadable mask. The passenger door opened and a woman emerged. She was tall and stunningly beautiful with raven hair and a predatory grace. She wore a tight crimson dress that screamed money and ambition. Clara recognized her from a society event months ago. Isabella Vance, a notoriously aggressive real estate developer. Isabella leaned against the car, a smug, triumphant smirk on her face as she looked at Clara, then at the house. Marcus. What is going on? Clara's voice trembled. Why can't I get in now? What is that sign? Marcus walked towards her, his footsteps echoing in the terrifying silence. He didn't look at her belly. He didn't look at her face. He looked at a point just over her shoulder. The house is sold, Clara, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a stranger. Sold. She repeated the word, tasting like ash. What do you mean, sold? This is our home. The baby's nursery is... My house is sold, he corrected her, his tone sharp. It was always my house, a pre-marital asset. My lawyers made sure of that. The prenup, a document she had signed without much thought, blinded by love and trust. Her own father had warned her, but she had dismissed his concerns as old-fashioned. But why a tear finally broke free and traced a hot path down her cheek. We're having a baby, Marcus. He finally met her gaze, and what she saw there horrified her. There was no love, no remorse, only icy contempt. Plans change. Isabella and I are together now. We're moving forward. Isabella pushed off the car and glided towards them, her arm linking possessively with Marcus's. She looked Clara up and down, her gaze lingering on the swell of her stomach with a flicker of distaste. Don't look so shocked, darling. Isabella purred, her voice like velvet laced with poison. You didn't really think a man like Marcus would be tied down forever, did you? Some of us offer more than just a domestic purpose. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Clara felt like she'd been slapped. My things, our wedding photos, the baby's room. She stammered, her mind racing. Your personal effects are in storage, Marcus said, dismissively pulling a card from his wallet. The details are here. My assistant will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. We'll be generous, of course. A settlement. He tried to hand her the card, but her hands were numb. She couldn't take it. Generous. She whispered, the full weight of the betrayal crashing down on her. You sold our home. You're leaving me while I'm carrying your son. You're throwing us away. Don't be so dramatic, Clara. He snapped, his composure finally cracking. You're not the first woman to get a divorce. I've deposited $50,000 into your account. That should be more than enough for you to find a new place and get settled before before. He couldn't even say the word baby. Get off the property, Clara, he said, his voice turning hard. The new owners are arriving shortly. It's no longer your concern. He turned, and with Isabella clinging to his arm, they walked back to the Rolls-Royce. They didn't look back. They didn't look back as Clara stood pregnant and alone in the driveway of the life that had just been stolen from her. The black car reversed, smoothly navigated the turn, and disappeared down the sun-drenched street, leaving only the scent of exhaust and shattered dreams. Clara stood there for an eternity, the $50,000 settlement, feeling like 30 pieces of silver. The sky so bright and cheerful, moments before, now seemed to mock her. Then the California sun betrayed her, and the sky opened up. A sudden, unseasonable downpour began soaking her hair, her dress, her soul, as she finally crumpled to the ground. The sound of her own heartbroken sobs, lost in the rhythm of the falling rain. The rain was relentless, plastering her thin silk blouse to her skin, the chill seeping deep into her bones. Clara didn't know how long she sat there on the wet asphalt of the driveway, her body shaking with a grief so profound it felt like a physical tearing. The $50,000 Marcus mentioned was a cruel joke. In a city where a shoebox apartment cost a fortune, it was a pittance, a dismissal. It was the price he had put on her, on their son. Her Range Rover, once a symbol of her comfortable life, now felt like a car. Where could she go? Her parents were gone, lost in a car accident 3 years prior. Her only living relative was a cousin in Oregon she hadn't spoken to in years. She had friends, yes, but they were their friends. Couples. They socialized with people enmeshed in Marcus's world of wealth and influence. To go to them would be to invite petty gossip and ultimately judgment. Except for one. Chloe. Chloe Jensen was her one true friend, a sharp-witted journalist she'd known since before Marcus was even in the picture. Chloe had never fully trusted him, always seeing a sliver of the narcissist beneath the charm. Clara pulled out her phone, her fingers clumsy and slick with rain. She found Chloe's number and pressed call. Ames. You okay? You sound awful. Chloe's voice was a lifeline. He kicked me out. Chloe. Clara sobbed the words tumbling out in a broken mess. He sold the house. He's with someone else. Isabella Vance. I have nowhere to go. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by a string of curses directed at Marcus that was both shocking and deeply comforting. Where are you right now? In the driveway. Stay in your car. Lock the doors. Text me the address. I'm coming. We'll figure this out. An hour later, Chloe's beat-up Honda Civic pulled up. Chloe, with her fiery red hair and fiercely loyal eyes, got out and ran to Clara's window, tapping on the glass. When Clara unlocked the door, Chloe pulled her into a fierce hug, ignoring the rain and the soaked designer clothes. We'll destroy him, Chloe said, her voice a low growl. Legally. Publicly. I don't care. But first, let's get you out of here. Chloe's apartment in Koreatown was a world away from Bel Air. It was small, vibrant, and cluttered with books and half-finished articles. It smelled of coffee and home. For the next 2 weeks, it was Clara's sanctuary. Chloe was a fierce guardian, fielding calls from Marcus's smarmy assistant and shielding Clara from the world. But the reality of her situation was a constant, crushing weight. The The $50,000 wouldn't last. She needed a lawyer, an apartment, furniture, baby supplies. She was 6 months pregnant, visibly, so making the prospect of finding a job in her specialized field of art history next to impossible. Every night she'd lie awake on Chloe's sofa bed, her hands on her belly, whispering apologies to her unborn son for the chaotic world he was about to enter. Her name, once associated with high society, was now being dragged through the mud. Whispers started expertly leaked by Marcus's PR team. Clara was unstable. Her pregnancy had made her erratic and demanding. Marcus had been a long-suffering husband who had finally broken free. The narrative was twisting, painting him as the victim. The injustice of it was a bitter pill. One rainy Thursday, desperate for a change of scenery and a sense of normalcy, Clara decided to visit a small independent bookstore a few blocks from Chloe's apartment. She needed to be surrounded by stories by worlds other than her own miserable one. Clutching a worn copy of a book on Renaissance art, she was walking back to the apartment, huddled under a small umbrella that did little to stop the driving rain. Her mind was a million miles away, calculating expenses, imagining courtrooms, picturing Marcus and Isabella in her house. Distracted, she stepped off the curb at the same time a cyclist, head down against the weather, swerved to avoid a puddle. He crashed right into her. The impact sent her stumbling backwards. Her purse flew open, its contents scattering across the wet pavement. The book landed in a puddle. The tiny sneakers she'd bought for the baby, which she carried with her like a talisman, tumbled into the gutter. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry," the cyclist said, untangling himself from his bike. Clara was more stunned than hurt, but the sight of the tiny, soaked shoes was the final straw. All the pent-up fear, anger, and hopelessness surged to the surface. She sank to her knees on the sidewalk, uncaring of the grime and the rain, and began to sob, her shoulders heaving. She was vaguely aware of footsteps approaching. Heavy, expensive footsteps. "Are you all right, miss?" a deep voice asked. It was calm, controlled, and cut through the noise of the city. Clara looked up, wiping rain and tears from her eyes. A man stood over her, holding a large black umbrella that shielded them both from the downpour. He was impossibly tall, dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than Chloe's car. His face was sharp and angular, with intense, dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. There was an aura of immense power and stillness about him. He looked like he owned the world and was currently unimpressed by it. A black limousine was idling by the curb, a chauffeur standing at attention. I'm fine," she lied, trying to gather her scattered belongings. Her hands were shaking too hard. The man knelt, his expensive trousers getting wet on the pavement, without a flicker of concern. He began picking up her things, her wallet, her keys, the lipstick that had rolled under a car. Then his hand hovered over the tiny mud-splattered sneaker in the gutter. He picked it up gently, his long fingers cradling it as if it were a fragile bird. He looked from the shoe to her swollen belly, and his expression, previously aloof and unreadable, shifted. It was a subtle change, a flicker of something she couldn't name. Recognition. Pity. "Let me help you," he said, his voice softer this time. It was a statement, not a question. He helped her to her feet, his grip on her elbow firm and steadying. "Where are you going?" Just an apartment." Around the corner, she mumbled, embarrassed by her state, by the fact that this powerful stranger was witnessing her at her absolute lowest point. "You're soaked through. You'll catch a cold," Let my driver take you." "No, I couldn't possibly." "I insist." He guided her towards the waiting limousine. The chauffeur opened the door, revealing an interior of plush cream leather that smelled of wealth and quiet success. It was a world she had once known, but now felt alien to her. She hesitated at the door. "I don't even know your name." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "My name is Kai Carter." The name hit her like a physical blow. Kai Carter. He wasn't just a millionaire CEO. He was the millionaire CEO. The enigmatic, media-shy founder of Carter Enterprises, a global tech and investment firm that was a direct and fierce competitor to Thorn Legacy Corp. Marcus spoke of him with a mixture of fear and derision, calling him a ruthless shark. He was a legend in the business world, a man who had built an empire from nothing. "You're Kai Carter," she breathed. He confirmed, his expression unreadable. He looked at her again, a long, searching look. "And you are Clara Ellis, Marcus Thorne's wife." Her blood ran cold. Of course, he knew who she was. This wasn't a random act of kindness. This was something else. Was he gloating? Did he want to see his rival's cast-off wife in her moment of humiliation? Ex-wife. "Soon," she corrected him, her voice regaining a sliver of its former strength. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Carter, but I can manage." She turned to leave, but his next words stopped her dead. "Your father was David Ellis, the art curator," he said. It wasn't a question. She spun around, stunned. "How did you know that he was a good man?" "He gave me my first break, an internship at the museum when I was a student with nothing to my name. He believed in me when no one else did." He paused, his gaze softening with a memory. "I was very sorry to hear of his passing. I owe him a debt I can never repay." Clara was speechless. Her father had helped countless students, but she had never heard this story. "The debt is his, but the respect is mine to give to his daughter." Kai continued, his voice low and sincere. "Please, allow me to help you, not as a rival to Marcus Thorne, but as someone who respects the memory of David Ellis. Let me get you home, and let me give you the name of my personal lawyer. She is the best in the city. She will ensure you are not taken advantage of." Clara looked at this formidable man, the supposed shark of the corporate world. In his eyes, she didn't see a predator. She saw an unexpected and incredibly powerful ally. She thought of Chloe's small apartment, her dwindling bank account, the smug look on Isabella's face, and the tiny, ruined sneaker Kai was still holding. She had nothing left to lose. With a deep breath that was half surrender and half hope, she nodded. "Okay, Mr. Carter, I accept your help." As she slid into the warm, silent sanctuary of the limousine, she had no idea that this chance encounter on a rain-slicked street was not the end of her drama, but the beginning of a battle that would shake the foundations of two of the city's most powerful families. The limousine glided through the city traffic with an imperious silence. Clara sat on the plush leather cashmere blanket draped over her shoulders by the silent chauffeur. Kai Carter sat opposite her, not speaking, simply observing the city lights blur past the tinted windows. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, a space filled with unspoken questions. They didn't drive to Chloe's cramped apartment in Koreatown. Instead, the limousine pulled into the subterranean garage of one of the newest, most exclusive high-rises in Century City, the Carter Tower. It was Kai's flagship building, a sleek monolith of glass and steel that scraped the sky. Carter. "This isn't where I live," Clara said, a new wave of uncertainty washing over her. "I know," he replied, turning to her as the car came to a stop. "You cannot fight a war from a refugee camp. You need a fortress, and until you have your own, you will use one of mine." Before she could protest, he was leading her through a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 270-degree view of Los Angeles, the city lights a glittering carpet below. The furniture was minimalist and modern, a curated collection of art, a genuine Rothko on one wall, a Giacometti sculpture in a corner speaking to a sophisticated and discerning taste. It was luxurious, but unlike her former home with Marcus, it wasn't ostentatious. It was a place of quiet, confident power. "This is too much," she whispered, overwhelmed. "It is a temporary base of operations," Kai stated, walking towards the kitchen, which was a marvel of stainless steel and Italian marble. "There is a fully stocked kitchen, a concierge service downstairs for anything you need, and the security is absolute. No one gets up here without my express permission. You will be safe here. You and your son." He said it with such finality, such calm authority, that arguing seemed futile. He was offering her a gilded shield and a sword, and she knew she would be a fool to refuse. The next morning, as promised, Kai's lawyer arrived. She was nothing like the folksy, avuncular lawyers Clara had imagined. Evelyn Reed was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, a severe haircut, and a suit that looked like it was woven from steel. She carried a slim leather briefcase and exuded an aura of lethal competence. They sat at a large glass dining table overlooking the city. Clara, feeling small and underdressed in the simple maternity dress Chloe had helped her buy, recounted the entire story. The prenup she'd barely read, Marcus's sudden change in behavior, the affair with Isabella Vance, the sale of the house, the public humiliation. Evelyn Reed listened without interruption, her fingers steepled. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered something far more valuable: strategy. The prenuptial agreement is ironclad regarding premarital assets, like the house itself. Evelyn began, her voice crisp. Marcus's father's lawyers were very good. However, they made a critical error. They were arrogant. An error, Clara asked, leaning forward. They focused on protecting the initial asset, but they were sloppy regarding the appreciation of that asset during the marriage, and more importantly, the commingling of funds, Evelyn explained. You, Clara, contributed to the value of that home, not just through financial means, but through your role as his wife, hosting events, managing the property, and creating a home that enhanced his social and business standing. This is a recognized contribution. We can argue for a significant portion of the home's increased value. A sliver of hope ignited in Clara's chest. But that is the small game, Evelyn continued, a predatory glint in her eye. The real issue here is fraud. Fraud. He sold a marital home, or what can be argued as a marital home in spirit and function, without your consent. He claims you signed the papers. Did you know? Never. I would never have agreed to sell that house, not with the baby coming. Excellent, Evelyn said with a thin smile. He forged your signature. That is a felony. He also liquidated shared investment portfolios to fund his new life with Miss Vance, hiding the assets in offshore accounts. We've already begun tracking the transfers. Marcus thinks he's clever. He isn't. He's just a common cheat who happens to have a rich father. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a surge of power. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a plaintiff. Over the next few days, the penthouse became a command center. Evelyn and her team of forensic accountants and investigators worked with terrifying efficiency. They subpoenaed bank records, real estate documents, and communication logs. Kai remained a distant but constant presence. He never intruded, but every evening he would call or send a brief text. "Are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" He arranged for a top prenatal nutritionist and a yoga instructor to visit her at the penthouse, ensuring her health and the babies were the top priority. One evening he joined her on the balcony. The air was cool and the city below was alive with light. "Why are you doing all of this?" Clara asked, her voice soft. "I know the story about my father and I'm grateful. But this is more than paying back a debt for an internship." Kai was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant Thorn Legacy Corp, building its logo, a proud, arrogant beacon in the skyline. "Your father gave me a chance," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But what you may not know is that my family also has a history with the Thorns. A long one." He turned to face her, his expression grim. "My father was a brilliant engineer. He co-founded a small tech firm with Marcus's father, Harrison Thorn, 30 years ago. They were partners, friends. My father developed a revolutionary patent that was set to make them both billionaires. But Harrison Thorn was a patient snake. He manipulated the contracts, pushed my father out, and stole the patent. He took everything. My father was ruined professionally and emotionally. He died a few years later of a heart attack, a broken man." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She had never heard this story. The Thorns had always painted themselves as self-made titans. "I was a teenager when it happened." Kai continued, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "I watched my family lose everything. I vowed that day that I would rebuild what Harrison Thorn destroyed, and that one day I would be in a position to hold him and his legacy accountable. I have spent the last 15 years building Carter Enterprises to be bigger, stronger, and more innovative than anything the Thorns could ever imagine." He looked at Clara, his dark eyes filled with a fire she now understood. "Marcus's betrayal of you is not just a personal matter, Clara. It is a symptom of the Thorn family's rot. It's the same arrogance, the same cruelty, the same belief that they are above consequences. His mistake was that in his haste to discard you, he exposed himself, forging your signature hiding assets. These are crimes, and I will provide you with every resource necessary to see that justice is served. Not just for you, but for my father as well." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a long-awaited reckoning. Clara was not a damsel in distress. She was the unwitting catalyst for a war between two dynasties. That night, Evelyn Reed delivered the first official salvo. A process server flanked by 2 imposing security guards walked into an exclusive Beverly Hills restaurant where Marcus and Isabella were celebrating their new life. In front of a room full of the city's elite, he served Marcus Thorn with a lawsuit that was breathtaking in its scope. It alleged fraud, forgery, illegal asset transfer, and infliction of emotional distress. It also filed an immediate injunction to freeze all of Marcus's known assets, personal and corporate, pending the investigation. The news report Chloe sent Clara later that night showed a photo of Marcus, his face pale with shock and fury, the legal documents clutched in his hand. Isabella stood beside him, her beautiful face a mask of disbelief and horror. The caption read, "Thorn heir sued by pregnant wife in explosive fraud case. In the quiet of the penthouse high above the city, Clara placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring movement. A small, determined smile touched her lips. The battle had just begun. The lawsuit landed like a bomb in the serene, manicured world of the Los Angeles elite. The story was irresistible, the cheating heir, the glamorous mistress, and the pregnant wife fighting back from the shadows with the backing of a mysterious, powerful benefactor. The narrative Marcus's PR team had so carefully crafted of the unstable, demanding wife was instantly obliterated, replaced by a far more compelling tale of betrayal and resilience. Marcus Thorne was not accustomed to being on the defensive. He and his family were used to controlling the story, to silencing problems with money and threats. But this was different. The asset freeze was a devastating blow, a logistical and public relations nightmare. Suddenly, his access to the endless well of Thorne family money was choked to a trickle. The credit cards he used to fund his lavish lifestyle with Isabella were declined. The planned renovations on their new house ground to a halt. Isabella Vance, whose attraction to Marcus was inextricably linked to his power and wealth, began to show the strain. The smug satisfaction was replaced by a nervous, shrewish energy. The romantic dinners were replaced by hissed arguments in the lobbies of hotels they could no longer afford. But the Thorne empire was old and formidable. And at its heart was a queen who would stop at nothing to protect her son and their legacy, Eleanor Thorne. Eleanor was a woman carved from ice with a smile that never reached her cold blue eyes. She saw Clara not as a wronged daughter-in-law, but as an existential threat, a commoner armed with a billionaire's weapon. She decided to handle the matter herself. One afternoon, as Clara was returning to the Carter Tower from a doctor's appointment, she was intercepted in the private garage. Eleanor Thorne stood waiting for her by the elevator, flanked by a severe-looking man who was clearly her personal security. Clara Eleanor said, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "We need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Eleanor," Clara replied, her heart pounding. She clutched her purse, her knuckles white. "My lawyer, Evelyn Reed, handles all communication." "Oh, don't be so dramatic," Eleanor scoffed, stepping forward to block her path. "Lawyers are for business. This is family. I came here to appeal to your better nature." "My better nature?" Clara asked, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Where was Marcus's better nature when he forged my name and threw me out on the street?" Eleanor's smile tightened. "Marcus is a passionate man. He made a mistake. But you are blowing this far out of proportion. You have been given a generous settlement. What you are doing now, this vulgar public spectacle, is an embarrassment. You are embarrassing the father of your child. He embarrassed himself when he chose to commit fraud." Clara countered, amazed at her own steadiness. The safety of the penthouse and the strength of her legal team had forged a new spine of steel within her. Eleanor's facade of civility began to crack. "Let's be clear, you little gold digger. You married my son for his money, and now you're trying to extort him with the help of his biggest rival. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? Kai Carter is using you. He's a predator, and he will discard you the moment you are no longer useful in his pathetic war against my family. Kai has shown me more kindness and respect in 2 weeks than Marcus did in 5 years, Clara retorted. Kindness, Eleanor sneered. He has you locked up in this glass tower like a pet. You think this is freedom? You are a pawn in his game. A very foolish one. She took another step closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. Drop this lawsuit. Take the money we are offering. We can make it a bit more for your trouble and disappear. Have your baby somewhere quiet. If you do not, I will personally see to it that you are destroyed. We will paint you as an unfit mother. We will prove you had an affair with Carter. We will drag your name through so much mud you'll never be clean again. We will fight for custody of that child, and I promise you a thorn will be raised by a thorn. You will not see a penny, and you will not see your son. The threat, so vile and direct, struck a primal fear in Clara's heart. The thought of losing her son was unbearable. For a moment she wavered. Just then the private elevator doors hissed open. Kai Carter stepped out. He had been in the security office watching the entire exchange on a monitor. He moved to stand beside Clara, his presence a solid, unshakable wall. He was taller than Eleanor's bodyguard, and his quiet intensity seemed to suck the air out of the garage. He looked down at Eleanor, his expression one of pure glacial contempt. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I heard your threats, as did the high-definition audio and video recorders in this garage. My legal team will be adding witness intimidation and coercion to the list of charges against your family." Eleanor Thorne, for the first time in her life, looked genuinely shocked. She paled. Furthermore, Kai continued taking a step forward as she instinctively took a step back. "If you or anyone associated with you ever comes within 500 feet of Ms. Ellis or her child again, I will unleash the full financial and legal power of my enterprise against yours. I will not just win a lawsuit. I will dismantle your legacy piece by piece. Your threat against her child has made this personal for me. Now get out of my building." His voice, though quiet, had the force of a command that could not be disobeyed. Eleanor, flustered and defeated, turned on her heel and practically fled to her waiting car. Upstairs in the penthouse, Clara was shaking, the adrenaline and fear finally catching up to her. Kai poured her a glass of water, his hand steady. "She meant it," Clara whispered. "She'll try to take my baby." "She will try," Kai corrected her gently. "But she will fail. The courts do not look kindly on adulterous fathers who commit fraud and whose families threaten pregnant women. Her threat was an act of desperation, Clara. It means we have them cornered." He was right, but Eleanor's attack opened up a new, uglier front in the war. True to her word, the Thorne PR machine went into overdrive. Tabloid articles appeared filled with anonymous sources who claimed Clara was mentally unstable. Photos of her and Kai, carefully edited to look more intimate than they were leaked. The narrative was clear. She was a scorned wife who had immediately jumped into the arms of a richer, more powerful man to exact revenge. The public pressure was immense. Every time she left the building for an appointment, she was hounded by paparazzi. The stress began to take a physical toll. Her blood pressure was elevated, and Dr. Hansen warned her that she needed to avoid stress at all costs for the health of the baby. The penthouse, once a sanctuary, started to feel like a cage again. Kai, seeing the toll it was taking on her, became a more constant, grounding presence. He would insist they eat dinner together, not to talk about the case, but about art, about books, about her dreams for her son. He would tell her stories about his own struggles, about building his company from the ground up. He was opening up to her, showing her the man behind the CEO persona. He discovered her love for painting a passion she'd abandoned when she married Marcus. One afternoon, she entered the penthouse's spare room to find it transformed into a fully equipped art studio with an easel, canvases, and every kind of paint she could imagine. "Evelyn says you need an outlet for the stress," he said, simply standing in the doorway. "My father's debt is repaid, Clara. My war with the thorns is my own. But helping you, that has become something different. It's not about revenge anymore. It's about seeing you and your son safe and happy." That evening, for the first time in years, Clara picked up a paintbrush. As she swept colors across the blank canvas, she wasn't painting away the pain. She was painting through it, finding a strength and a voice she thought she had lost forever. She was no longer just a pawn or a plaintiff. She was a creator, a mother, a survivor. And as the Thorns' empire raged outside her window, inside her fortress, she was finally starting to build her own. The legal battle stretched into the fall, a grueling war of attrition, fought through depositions, motions, and discovery requests. The Thorn family's legal team, a pack of high-priced corporate sharks, did everything they could to delay and obstruct. They filed motion after motion to have the asset freeze lifted, to dismiss the fraud charges, to discredit Clara as a witness. Evelyn Reed, calm and methodical, batted them away one by one. The turning point came during Marcus's deposition. The meeting was held in a sterile conference room in Evelyn Reed's downtown office. Clara was present on Kai's insistence. "You need to see this," he'd said. "You need to see him without his power." Marcus walked in, flanked by his lawyers. He looked thinner, his handsome face etched with strain. The swagger was gone, replaced by a brittle arrogance. He refused to look at Clara. Isabella Vance was nowhere in sight. The tabloids reported she had decamped to Europe, her loyalty fading as quickly as Marcus's bank accounts. Evelyn began calmly asking about his relationship with Clara, his business dealings, the sale of the house. Marcus answered with rehearsed, dismissive replies, sticking to the story that Clara had agreed to the sale and was now suffering from a case of seller's remorse, manipulated by Kai Carter. Then Evelyn changed tactics. "Mr. Thorn." "I'm placing before you Exhibit A," she said, sliding a document across the polished table. "This is the final sales agreement for your Bel Air property. Please turn to the last page." Marcus did so, his expression smug. "Yes, that's the document." "And that is your signature?" Evelyn asked. "It is. And underneath it, the signature of Clara Ellis. Did you see her sign this document?" "Yes, of course." Marcus lied, his voice firm. "She signed it in our home office on the evening of June 10th. That's a very specific memory," Evelyn noted. "What were you doing that evening?" "We were discussing our future, the need to downsize for a more family-focused life. It was all very amicable." Clara felt a surge of hot anger. She had been at a prenatal class that evening, a fact she had documented in her calendar, and Chloe could corroborate. Evelyn smiled, a tight, dangerous smile. "Thank you, Mr. Thorn. Now I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Albert Finch." She gestured to a man sitting quietly in the corner, whom Clara hadn't noticed before. "Dr. Finch is one of the country's leading forensic handwriting analysts. He has had access to dozens of samples of my client's signature from before this period, checks, letters, legal documents. Dr. Finch. Can you share your conclusion regarding the signature on Exhibit A?" Dr. Finch adjusted his glasses. "The signature of Clara Ellis on the sales document is a forgery. A competent one, but a forgery nonetheless. There are microscopic tells in the pressure and slant that are inconsistent with every known authentic sample. It was created by someone attempting to imitate her handwriting. Marcus's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection. This is conjecture. It will be admissible testimony in a court of law, counsel, Evelyn said calmly. And perjury in a deposition is a serious offence, Mr. Thorne. Marcus's face had gone ashen. The confidence evaporated, replaced by naked panic. But that Evelyn continued leaning forward like a hawk, spotting its prey, is not your biggest problem. She slid another file across the table. It was thicker. This is not about just one house, is it, Marcus? This is about a pattern. Let's talk about the Thorne Legacy Corp's Phoenix Project. At the mention of the name, not only Marcus, but his entire legal team stiffened. It was clearly an internal confidential code name. The Phoenix Project. Evelyn elaborated, her voice cutting through the silence, is a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. For the last 3 years, you and your father have been systematically siphoning funds from Thorne Legacy Corp. into this entity under the guise of research and development. You've been devaluing the public company to prepare for a hostile takeover by yourselves. You plan to buy it back for pennies on the dollar, taking it private and cheating your shareholders out of billions. Marcus looked as if he'd been physically struck. Where did you... That's a lie. It's corporate espionage. It's not espionage when it's discovered through legal means. Kai Carter's voice cut in. He had been silent until now, a thundercloud in the corner of the room. He stood up and walked to the table. Your mistake, Marcus Kai, said, his voice low and lethal, was getting sloppy. When you forged Clara's signature, you created a criminal case. That gave us subpoena power that a simple civil divorce case would not. We were able to look into everything. And when we started pulling on the thread of the money you stole from your marital assets to hide in your personal offshore accounts, we found they were linked to a much, much larger web of accounts. Your Phoenix Project accounts. He laid a final document on the table. It was a wire transfer confirmation. And this is the real masterpiece. To cover your tracks, you moved money from the Phoenix Project accounts to buy out a tech patent from a smaller firm, a patent you needed to make the takeover work. But the bank that handled the transfer is a bank that Carter Enterprises happens to have a controlling interest in. Every transaction was flagged. We have it all. The transfers, the shell corporations, the falsified board minutes signed by you and your father. It's over. The room was utterly silent. Marcus Thorne stared at the papers, his face a mask of utter devastation. He wasn't just going to lose a divorce settlement. He was facing federal charges, mail fraud, wire fraud, securities fraud. Years, potentially decades in prison. He had not only destroyed his own life, but had brought down the entire house of Thorne his father had built on a stolen legacy. He finally looked at Clara. For the first time, she saw not a monster but a pathetic broken man, a boy who had been given everything and had destroyed it all through greed and arrogance. There was no triumph in her heart, only a profound, weary sadness. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He simply slumped in his chair, his head in his hands as his lawyers began a frantic whispered conference. The king had been checkmated. The empire had fallen. 2 weeks later, Clara gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. She named him David after her father. She was in a private suite at the city's best hospital, a suite Kai had arranged. He was the first person she called after Chloe. He came to the hospital not with the air of a victorious CEO, but with a quiet reverence. He looked at the baby asleep in Clara's arms, and a genuine, unguarded smile touched his face. "He looks like you," Kai said, softly. "He has your strength." The news of the Thorne scandal had exploded. Harrison Thorne was forced to step down as CEO amidst an SEC investigation. The company's stock plummeted. Marcus, in exchange for testifying against his own father, was negotiating a plea deal. The Thorne legacy, once a towering monument to power, was now a smoking ruin. Clara's settlement was swift and massive. She didn't take it from Marcus. There was nothing left to take. Evelyn Reed, on Kai's instruction, had structured a deal that made Clara a primary creditor in the corporate bankruptcy proceedings. Her settlement came from the liquidated assets of the corrupt empire that had tried to crush her. It wasn't alimony. It was justice. She was now an independently wealthy woman, her future and her son's future secured not by a man but by her own resilience. Holding her son, looking out the hospital window at the city skyline, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The storm was over. The war was won. And from the wreckage, something new, something entirely her own, was just beginning to grow. Clara Ellis's journey took her from the heights of Bel Air to the depths of betrayal and back again, not to the life she lost, but to one she built herself. She walked through fire and emerged not burned but forged into a woman of incredible strength, a devoted mother, a talented artist, and the master of her own destiny. Marcus Thorne's greed and cruelty were the catalysts for his own downfall, a reminder that empires built on lies eventually crumble to dust. And Kai Carter, who started on a path of cold revenge, found an unexpected redemption in an act of kindness, healing old wounds by helping to create a new future. What did you think of Clara's incredible story of survival and justice? Do you believe the Thornes got what they deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by her story of resilience and empowerment, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for watching. On the grandest night of the year, beneath the glittering chandeliers of the St. Regis, Grand Sean Butler was celebrated as the city's philanthropic king. He was the man who had everything: a sprawling real estate empire, the respect of his peers, and a breathtakingly beautiful wife, Helen, on his arm. But while hundreds of guests toasted his name, Helen wasn't smiling beside him. She wasn't even in the ballroom. She was shivering in the pitch-black cold of a basement wine cellar, locked in by the very man they were all applauding. Her husband had silenced her to protect his perfect image. What he never counted on was that someone else was watching someone who knew the darkness that hid behind a dazzling smile, the one man in the room with the power to burn Sean's world to the ground. The ride to the annual Gilded Cage Gala was suffocatingly silent. The air in the back of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was thick with unspoken threats, a familiar tension that coiled in Helen Butler's stomach like a serpent. Her husband, Sean, sat beside her, a statue carved from ambition and rage. He hadn't spoken a word since she'd walked down the grand staircase of their sterile minimalist mansion. He'd simply looked at her, his gaze sweeping over the custom-made sapphire silk gown, his lip curling in a way that wasn't a smile. "The dress is too much," he finally said. his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the plush leather seats. He didn't look at her, instead staring out at the rain-slicked streets of downtown Chicago. Helen's hands, already clammy, tightened around her small clutch. It's the gala, Sean. It's our gala. Everyone is dressed up. She had chosen the dress to feel strong, a sheath of armor in a vibrant, defiant blue. It draws attention, he clipped back. Your job is to be an elegant accessory, Helen. Not the main event. The main event is me. It's securing the final investment from Kenji Tanaka for the waterfront project. An accessory. That's all she had been for the 5 years of their marriage. A beautiful, well-educated and silent partner who looked good in photographs and could charm the wives of potential investors with her knowledge of art and literature. But beneath the surface, she was a prisoner. Her life was a meticulously curated exhibition of Sean's success, and any deviation from the script was met with cold fury. Her friends had been slowly pruned from her life, deemed unsuitable or too influential. Her access to her own family trust was managed through Sean's accountants. He had built her a gilded cage and convinced the world it was a palace. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be the end. Tucked inside her clutch beneath her phone and lipstick was a small memory card. On it were copies of the documents she had found in his private study last week, hidden inside a false-bottomed humidor. They were offshore account statements, falsified permit applications, and a detailed ledger of bribes paid to city officials for the very waterfront project he was so desperate to fund tonight. He wasn't just cutting corners. He was building his empire on a foundation of pure fraud. The discovery had been the final brutal crack in her denial. His control, his jealousy, his temper. It wasn't a flawed man's idea of protection. It was the desperate terror of a con artist afraid of being exposed. She had already contacted a lawyer, a discreet woman named Patricia Chen, and had a plan. After the gala, she was going to her sister's place. On Monday, they would file. Are you listening to me? Sean's voice snapped her back to the present. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, his fingers digging into the delicate bones. When we arrive, you will smile. You will talk about the foundation, about the children's wing we are funding. You will not drink more than 1 glass of champagne. And you will stay by my side. Understood? Helen looked at his hand on her wrist, at the gold signet ring, pressing a painful indentation into her skin. She felt a surge of something hot and unfamiliar, pure, unadulterated hatred. She met his cold grey eyes in the dim light of the car. Let go of me, Sean. Her voice was quiet, but it held a new steel he wasn't accustomed to. He stared at her for a moment, surprised by the defiance. A flicker of something truly ugly crossed his face before he smoothed it over into his signature mask of authority. He released her wrist, leaving angry red marks behind. Don't test me tonight, Helen. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Oh, but she did. She was just beginning to understand. The gala was being held at the half-finished penthouse level of his newest skyscraper, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of the glittering city. The raw concrete and exposed steel were artfully draped in white silk and fairy lights, creating a dramatic contrast that the society pages would rave about. For the first hour, Helen played her part perfectly. She smiled until her cheeks ached, shook hands with politicians and tech moguls, and listened to Sean lie with practiced ease about his philanthropic passions. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, admiring her dress, her poise, her life. If only they knew. She saw Mr. Tanaka arrive with his entourage, a serious-looking man, whose approval Sean craved like a drug. Sean immediately pasted on his most charming smile and steered Helen toward them. "Tanaka-san, so glad you could make it. You remember my wife, Helen?" Helen inclined her head gracefully. "It's a pleasure to see you again, Mr. Tanaka." As Sean launched into his sycophantic pitch, Helen felt a wave of nausea. She couldn't do it. She couldn't stand here and be a part of this lie for one more second. She needed air. "If you'll excuse me," she murmured, placing a hand on Sean's arm. "I just need a moment." Sean's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned to ice. He gripped her elbow, his fingers like talons. "We're in the middle of a conversation." "I'm feeling a little faint," she whispered, a plausible excuse in the stuffy, crowded room. She let her eyes flutter slightly, a trick learned from years of having to feign weakness to avoid his wrath. He was trapped. He couldn't make a scene in front of the man he was trying to impress. With a barely perceptible nod, he released her. 5 minutes. The powder room off the main hall. But Helen didn't go to the powder room. She turned down a corridor marked for staff, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her plan had been to wait until after the gala. But his touch, his threats, they had accelerated everything. She couldn't spend another minute as Mrs. Sean Butler. She pulled out her phone to call the car service she had secretly arranged. She was just about to press send when a shadow fell over her. Going somewhere. Sean. He had followed her. The public charm was gone, replaced by a terrifying, predatory stillness. "I told you I needed air," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You're a terrible liar, Helen. I saw your face. You were running." He took a step closer, backing her against a service elevator. "What did you think you were going to do, haul a taxi? Where would you go? Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me." "That's not true," she whispered, clutching the memory card in her purse like a talisman. His eyes narrowed. He was a cornered animal, and his instincts were sharp. He glanced down at her clutch. "What's in the bag?" Before she could react, he snatched it from her hand. He opened it and dumped the contents onto a nearby catering trolley with a loud clatter. Her phone, her lipstick a compact mirror, and the tiny black memory card. He picked it up, holding it between his thumb and forefinger, as if it were a dead insect. "What is this?" Helen's blood ran cold. "It's nothing. For my camera." He stared at her, his face a mask of dawning incandescent rage. He knew. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew she had crossed a line. "You went into my study." It wasn't a question. He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "You stupid, ungrateful woman. Did you really think you could ruin me?" He began dragging her down the corridor, away from the distant sound of the orchestra. "Sean, stop! You're hurting me!" she cried, her heels scraping against the concrete floor. They reached an unmarked metal door. He swiped a key card from his wallet and pulled it open, revealing a set of steep, dark stairs leading down. The air that wafted up was cold and smelled of dust and damp stone. "Where are you taking me?" she pleaded, terror finally breaking through her resolve. "You wanted some quiet time to think." "I'm going to give it to you," he hissed, yanking her down the stairs. "You are going to stay down here and reflect on your loyalty. After my deal with Tanaka is signed and the party is over, I'll come back for you, and we will have a very, very long conversation about your future." He dragged her across a dusty basement floor and stopped in front of another heavy door. He unlocked it, revealing a space of absolute blackness. It was the building's wine cellar, still under construction. "No, Sean, please." He shoved her inside. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the cold, hard floor. The sapphire dress, her beautiful armor, was now just a scrap of silk in the dirt. He stood in the doorway, a monstrous silhouette against the dim light of the basement. "Enjoy the party, my love." The heavy door slammed shut, plunging her into a terrifying, suffocating darkness. The click of the deadbolt echoed in the small space, a sound of absolute finality. She was alone, buried alive in the heart of her husband's triumph. The darkness was absolute. It was a physical presence pressing in on Helen from all sides, stealing the air from her lungs. For the first few minutes, panic was a wild animal clawing at her throat. She scrambled back to the door, her hands slapping against the cold, unyielding steel. "Sean, let me out! Sean!" Her voice was swallowed by the insulated walls. The only sound was the frantic, ragged rasp of her own breathing and the frantic drumming of her fists. He was gone. The music, the laughter, the life of the party upstairs, it was on another planet. She was in a tomb. Slowly, painfully, the adrenaline subsided, replaced by the biting cold of the cellar. The thin silk of her gown offered no protection against the damp chill seeping up from the concrete floor. Shivering, she pulled her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little warmth she had. Tears of rage and terror streamed down her face, hot at first, then cold against her skin. How could she have been so stupid to think she could simply walk away? Sean had never been one to lose. He didn't just defeat his opponents, he annihilated them. And she had just declared herself his opponent. Her mind raced, replaying every moment. The memory card. He had it. He would destroy it, and with it, her only leverage. He would come back for her, as he promised, and the life he would design for her now would be infinitely worse than the gilded cage she'd known before. It would be a true prison, stripped of all illusions. Hours seemed to crawl by. In the disorienting blackness, her sense of time dissolved. She could hear the faint, deep thumping of the bass from the orchestra above, a ghostly heartbeat, reminding her of the world she was no longer a part of. With each distant thud, she pictured him. Sean working the room, his face a mask of easy charm. Sean shaking Tanaka's hand, his eyes glittering with success. Sean accepting toasts, the conquering hero. And no one, not a single person in that room of 1,000 people knew his wife was locked in the darkness beneath their feet. The thought was so grotesquely ironic, it almost made her laugh, a broken, hysterical sound that died in her throat. The fear began to curdle into something else, a slow burning, icy rage. He had underestimated her. He saw her as a possession, a fragile doll to be put on a shelf or locked in a box. He had never not once seen the woman she was, or the woman she could become. Lying on the cold floor, stripped of everything, Helen made a vow. If she got out of this room, this wouldn't be the end. It would be the beginning. She wouldn't just leave him. She would dismantle him. She would take a sledgehammer to the fraudulent empire he was so proud of and watch it turn to dust. Upstairs in the glittering ballroom, Declan Reese felt a prickle of unease. He was a man who trusted his instincts, instincts that had helped him build a multi-billion-dollar investment firm from the ground up by seeing the cracks in a flawless facade. and right now the facade of Sean Butler was showing a hairline fracture. Declan hadn't wanted to come tonight. He found Sean to be a loathsome creature, all flash, no substance, a peacock puffed up with other people's money. But his firm was a minority stakeholder in the Tanaka Corporation, and Kenji Tanaka had personally requested his presence as a sign of goodwill before finalizing his own investment in Butler's project. Declan's interest, however, was not in Sean, but in his wife. He had met Helen Butler once before, a year ago, at a museum benefit. They had spoken for only 10 minutes, but it was enough. She wasn't like the other vapid social climbing wives that populated this world. She had a quiet intelligence, a genuine passion when she spoke of art, and a profound sadness in her eyes that a happy woman shouldn't possess. He'd also recognized her name. Her father, the late Professor Alistair Finch, had been a legendary art historian and a mentor to Declan in his university days. Alistair was a man of fierce integrity and intellect, and Declan couldn't fathom how his brilliant daughter had ended up married to a brute like Sean. Tonight, he'd watched her. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile never quite reached her eyes. He saw the brutal grip Sean had on her wrist when they were in the car, and the flash of defiance in her face. And then he saw her leave the ballroom, followed a moment later by a thunderous-looking Sean. That was nearly 2 hours ago. Sean had returned alone, his mood strangely buoyant, schmoozing with Tanaka as if he hadn't a care in the world. But Helen was gone. Declan casually made his way over to Sean, who was holding court by the champagne bar. "Sean, spectacular evening," Declan said, his voice smooth and neutral. Sean turned, his smile widening when he saw who it was. Having Declan Reese acknowledge him was a major social coup. "Declan, good to see you. Glad you could make it. We're doing great things here." "Indeed. I was just admiring the view. I haven't seen your wife Helen for a while. I was hoping to ask her about a new acquisition of mine. I trust she's well." Sean's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Ah, yes. Helen." She was feeling a bit overwhelmed by the crowd. A sudden migraine. "I had my driver take her home an hour ago. She was terribly disappointed to leave. It was a perfect lie. Plausible, polite, and unverifiable. But Declan's internal alarm bells were ringing loudly. The Helen he'd briefly met didn't seem like the type to be felled by a simple murrain on her husband's biggest night, and there was a flicker of something triumph cruelty in Sean's eyes that didn't match the story of a concerned husband. Declan nodded, feigning acceptance. "A shame. Please send her my best for a speedy recovery." He walked away, but he wasn't satisfied. He scanned the room, his eyes sharp and calculating. He noted Sean's security detail, their positions, their demeanor. He noted the layout of the floor, the staff corridors, the elevators. He was a man who solved problems by collecting data, and right now the data wasn't adding up. His gaze fell on the floor near the entrance to the main staff corridor. Something glinted under the lights. It was small, metallic. While others were distracted by a toast, Declan moved smoothly toward it, bending down as if to adjust his shoe. He picked it up. It was a small, exquisitely crafted lapel pin in the shape of a silver falcon, and his blood ran cold. He knew this pin. He had gifted it to Professor Alistair Finch himself 20 years ago as a token of gratitude. Alistair had told him he would give it to his daughter one day, as it was a family crest of sorts. Helen had been wearing it on the shoulder of her sapphire gown tonight. He looked from the pin in his hand toward the staff corridor. Then he looked at Sean, laughing across the room, a man celebrating a victory. Helen hadn't gone home. She was somewhere in this building, and the pin lying discarded on the floor like a breadcrumb told Declan that she hadn't left willingly. Declan Reese didn't build his empire by being impulsive. He was a strategist, a man who saw the whole board, not just the next move. Panicking or confronting Sean publicly would achieve nothing. It would give Sean the moral high ground and paint Declan as a meddling rival. No, if Helen was in trouble, he needed leverage. He needed proof. He pocketed the silver falcon pin, its sharp edges pressing into his palm. It was a tangible link, a piece of the puzzle. He discreetly approached one of the catering captains, a frazzled-looking woman with a headset. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I seem to have misplaced my phone. I believe I may have left it downstairs when I came up through the service entrance. Would you mind letting me have a look?" He flashed a disarming smile. "I'm a bit lost without it." The woman, flustered at being addressed by a man of Declan's stature, fumbled with her own keycard. "Of course, Mr. Reese. The service elevator is just down this hall, but the basement is mostly storage and construction. I'm sure it's just sitting on a crate somewhere. I won't be a moment." She swiped her card, and the elevator doors slid open. "It's level B1, sir. Just let me know if you need anything." "Thank you." The doors closed, and Declan was alone. The descent was swift. The polished glamour of the penthouse gala gave way to the stark industrial reality of the building's skeleton. The elevator opened onto a cavernous, dimly lit concrete basement. The air was cool and smelled of wet cement and sawdust. A labyrinth of corridors stretched out, lined with stacked drywall pallets of tiles and plumbing fixtures. The distant thump of the music was more pronounced here, a muffled, ghostly rhythm. Where would a man like Sean hide his wife? Not somewhere obvious. Somewhere secure. Somewhere out of the way. Declan started walking his expensive leather shoes, silent on the dusty floor. He followed the main corridor, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. He passed storage rooms, electrical panels, and utility closets. Everything was locked. He thought about the falcon pin. It was found near the staff corridor entrance upstairs. Sean must have been dragging her. She must have tried to fight back to leave a sign. It was a deliberate act of a desperate, intelligent woman. He reached the end of the main passage, which branched into two smaller corridors. One led to the parking garage ramp. The other was a dead end terminating at a single heavy-duty steel door. It looked different from the others, newer, more fortified, with a high-security digital and key lock. It was the kind of door one would install for a vault or a wine cellar. He approached the door and listened. Nothing. He pressed his ear against the cold steel. For a moment, there was only silence. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching sound. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Someone was inside. He examined the lock. It was a complex system. He couldn't force it without creating a massive disturbance. He needed a key card. Sean's key card. Confrontation was now the only option, but it had to be on his terms. He took out his phone and sent a quick encrypted text to his personal security chief, a former Mossad agent named Ben. The message was simple: Butler Tower. Basement level. Possible hostage situation. Await my signal. Silent entry protocol. Then he went back upstairs. He re-entered the party with a placid expression, a wolf in sheep's clothing. The gala was in full swing. He saw Sean accepting congratulations from the mayor. Mr. Tanaka was at his side, looking pleased. The deal was likely done. Sean was at the absolute peak of his triumph. It was the perfect moment to shatter it. Declan intercepted a waiter and took 2 glasses of champagne. He walked directly toward Sean. Sean, a word, Declan said, his voice cutting through the chatter. Sean turned a smug, proprietary look on his face. Declan, enjoying the party, I trust you heard the good news. Tanaka is in. The waterfront is a go. Excellent news, Declan said, handing him a glass of champagne. To your success. Sean preened, raising his glass. To success. They both took a sip. As Sean lowered his glass, Declan leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only Sean could hear. I have a question for you, Sean. It's about your wine cellar. Sean's smile froze on his face. The color drained from it in an instant. It was a subtle shift, but to a predator like Declan, it was a massive tell. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do. Declan continued, his voice still a silken whisper, though now laced with ice. The one in the basement. The one with the very secure lock. I'm concerned about the acoustics. I was wondering if you could hear a woman screaming from inside it. Sean's glass trembled in his hand. You're insane. Am I? Declan opened his own hand. Resting in his palm was the silver falcon pin. Helen dropped this. A lovely piece. A family heirloom, I believe. Her father gave it to me for safekeeping years ago. The lie was seamless, designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Sean stared at the pin, and in his eyes Declan saw it all, rage, panic, and the dawning horror of being caught. I am going to walk over to Mr. Tanaka and the mayor right now, Declan said, his voice deadly calm. And I am going to tell them that you have your wife locked in the basement. I'll let them decide what to do with that information. Or you can give me the key card to that door, and we can handle this quietly. Your choice. You have 10 seconds. Sean was trapped. A public accusation from Declan Reese would be catastrophic, deal or no deal. It would trigger an investigation, and his entire house of cards would come tumbling down. He stared at Declan with pure, undiluted hatred. But he was above all a pragmatist. Silently, his movements stiff and jerky, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted a single black key card and pressed it into Declan's hand. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life, Sean hissed, his voice trembling with fury. No, Declan replied, closing his hand around the card. You made it when you turned the lock. Declan turned and walked away without a backward glance. He sent another text to Ben's signal. B1, North Corridor. Stand by. He took the service elevator back down to the silent concrete tomb. This time, as he walked toward the steel door, he felt no hesitation. He swiped the card. The digital lock beeped and flashed green. He turned the heavy deadbolt. He pulled the door open. The scratching sound stopped. From the depths of the suffocating blackness, a figure slowly rose. Helen stood there, blinking against the sudden dim light from the hallway. Her sapphire gown was stained with dust. Her hair was a mess, and tear tracks marked her beautiful face. But her eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were blazing with a cold, hard fire. She saw Declan, and a flicker of confusion crossed her face. Mr. Reese, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Helen, he said softly. It's all right. I'm here. Let's get you out of here. He extended a hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her hand was freezing cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. As she stepped out of the darkness and into the light, she did not look back. Declan didn't lead Helen back towards the gala. He led her in the opposite direction toward the parking garage ramp. As they emerged into the cavernous, empty garage, a black, unassuming sedan detached itself from the shadows and glided to a stop before them. The back door opened. Ben Declan's head of security was at the wheel, his face impassive. "Get in," Declan said gently. "You're safe now." Helen slid into the plush leather interior, a space of warmth and quiet after the freezing cellar. Declan followed, closing the door behind him. The car pulled away smoothly, ascending the ramp and merging into the late-night Chicago traffic. The Butler Tower, a monument to Sean's ego, shrank in the rearview mirror. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Helen simply stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. She was wrapped in a cashmere blanket Ben had produced from the front seat, a cup of hot tea warming her icy hands. The shock was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and a trembling that she couldn't control. Declan gave her the space she needed. He didn't pepper her with questions or offer platitudes. He simply sat in the quiet presence of her survival, a silent guardian. Finally, in a small, raw voice, she spoke. "How did you know?" Declan looked at her, his expression serious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver falcon pin, placing it in her open palm. Her fingers closed around it, a wave of emotion washing over her. "My father's pin. I tried to drop it. I didn't know if anyone would even see it, let alone understand." "Your father was my professor," Declan said quietly. "Alistair Finch. He was my mentor at Cambridge. He spoke of you often. He was immensely proud of your sharp mind and your eye for detail. When I saw the pin, I knew something was wrong. Alistair's daughter wouldn't be careless with something so precious." Helen stared at him, stunned. This enigmatic billionaire, this rival of her husband's, was connected to her past, to the father she still missed every day. It was an impossible coincidence, a lifeline thrown from a world she thought she had lost forever. "He thought the world of you," Declan continued. "He would be incandescent with rage if he knew what that man did to you tonight." The mention of her father's protective anger broke something in her. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. "He would," she whispered. "Sean, he found out I was planning to leave him. I found evidence, Mr. Reese, evidence of everything. Bribery, fraud. The entire waterfront project is built on lies. He locked me in there to silence me." "Call me Declan," he said softly, "and I believe you. I've suspected for years that Butler's success was hollow. The numbers never added up. He expands too fast, takes on too much leverage. It's the behavior of a gambler, not a builder." They drove to a discreet 5-star hotel where Declan kept a permanent residence. He didn't take her to a suite, but to a private wing secured by his own team. It was a latent, opulent sanctuary, a world away from the violence and fear of the past few hours. A female member of Declan's staff was waiting with a change of clothes, toiletries, and a gentle professional demeanor. An hour later, Helen emerged from a hot shower, dressed in a simple silk blouse and soft trousers. The grime was washed away, but the chill remained deep within her. She found Declan in a large, quiet study, a fire crackling in the hearth. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand and a look of deep contemplation on his face. "Sean will have my memory card by now," Helen said, her voice stronger. "He'll destroy it. It will be my word against his. And he is the king of Chicago." "Evidence can be recreated," Declan said, turning to face her. He may destroy the card, but he can't destroy the electronic trail. The bank transfers the shell corporations, the falsified emails. It's all there if you know where to look. And I have people who are very, very good at looking. Helen walked further into the room. The vow she had made to herself in that dark cellar returned to her no longer a desperate fantasy, but a tangible possibility. "I don't just want to leave him, Declan," she said, her voice low and intense. "I don't want to just disappear and let him continue. He tried to bury me. I want to see his entire world turned to ash." Declan studied her. He saw the fire from the cellar was still there, burning brighter than ever. He saw the intelligence her father had spoken of, now sharpened into a weapon. He saw a woman who had been pushed past her breaking point and had come back stronger, harder. "Good," he said with a slow nod. "Because Sean Butler is a cancer, and the only way to deal with cancer is to cut it out completely." He took a sip of his whiskey. He made 2 mistakes tonight. The first was underestimating his wife. The second was making an enemy of me. A new dynamic was being forged in the firelight of that study. It was not the story of a damsel in distress and her white knight. It was the formation of a powerful, strategic alliance. Helen had the insider knowledge, the specific details of Sean's crimes. Declan had the resources, the power, and the ruthlessness to act on that knowledge. "He has a painting," Helen said, suddenly her mind already working, piecing things together. "A Degas. Dancer at the bar. He used it as collateral for a massive bridge loan to get the waterfront project started. He boasts about it constantly. It's his prized possession." Declan raised an eyebrow. "I know the painting. It was sold at Christie's 3 years ago for $80 million. Helen looked directly at him, her eyes clear and certain. "It's a fake. A forgery. It's the best I've ever seen, but it's a fake. My father taught me how to spot them. The canvas weave is wrong for the period. The cobalt blue pigment has trace elements that weren't available until the 1950s. I told Sean my suspicions a year ago. He told me I was being hysterical and to never mention it again." Declan stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was a predatory, dangerous smile. He finally understood. This was the key. Not the complicated web of bribes and shell companies which would take months to unravel in court. Bank fraud, using a forged masterpiece to secure a 9-figure loan. That was simple, brutal, and fast. Helen Declan said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "You are far more than your father's daughter. You are a weapon. And Sean has no idea you're aimed directly at his heart." The alliance was sealed. In that moment, Helen Butler ceased to be a victim. She became the architect of her husband's destruction. The next morning, the city was buzzing. The society columns were filled with effusive praise for the Gilded Cage Gala, calling Sean Butler a visionary and a titan of industry. There was a brief mention of his wife Helen having to leave early due to a sudden illness. Sean had controlled the narrative perfectly. To the outside world, everything was perfect. But in the secure, silent bubble of Declan's penthouse, a war room was being assembled. The first call was to Patricia Chen, Helen's lawyer. She arrived within the hour, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her late 40s, with eyes that missed nothing. She listened to Helen's story without interruption, her expression shifting from professional concern to controlled fury. Imprisonment, assault, coercion. "He's crossed so many lines he's not even on the map anymore," Patricia said, her pen flying across a legal pad. "But he's insulated. We need something that cuts through the layers of corporate protection. Something undeniable. The painting, Helen said. The Degas. Declan, who had been listening from the sidelines, stepped forward. The loan collateralized by that painting is with Sterling Mutual Bank. Their CEO, Robert Lanning, is an old-school stickler for the rules. He's also a rival of mine. He would love nothing more than to see me fail, but he hates being made a fool of even more. The plan began to take shape, elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. They wouldn't just expose the forgery. They would use it as a trigger to detonate Sean's entire financial structure. The team expanded. Declan brought in 2 of his most trusted specialists. The first was a forensic accountant named Miles, a quiet, unassuming man who could make spreadsheets, sing, and follow a money trail through the most complex offshore labyrinths. The second was an art expert, a former curator from the Louvre named Dr. Alistair Beck, a man with a legendary reputation and an almost supernatural ability to authenticate masterpieces. For security reasons, he would consult remotely from his home in Geneva. Helen became the linchpin of the entire operation. This was not Declan's revenge. He was merely providing the arsenal. The strategy, the targeting, that was all hers. She spent hours with Miles detailing every conversation she could remember about finances, every offhand comment Sean had made about his partners, his holding companies, his secret accounts. She reconstructed the timeline of his acquisitions and investments from memory, providing the framework for Miles to begin his digital deep dive. Her most crucial work was with Dr. Beck. They held encrypted video calls that lasted late into the night. She described the Degas from memory, her art historian's training coming to the forefront. The craquelure is too uniform. Doctor, she explained, her voice confident and precise. It's artificially aged, and the signature, the D, is slightly too looped. Degas's later signatures were sharper, more angular. Sean keeps the painting in his study under specially designed lighting that flatters the colors but hides the imperfections. He never lets anyone get too close. Dr. Beck, a formidable man with a shock of white hair, listened intently, occasionally asking sharp, probing questions about provenance documents and previous owners. He claims he has a complete provenance from the Durand-Ruel gallery, Helen said. But I noticed a gap, 14 months between 1941 and 1942. It's listed as Private Collection Switzerland. It's a classic forger's trick. Hide the piece during the chaos of war, and it re-emerges with a cloudy history that's difficult to verify. Indeed, Dr. Beck murmured, his eyes gleaming with intellectual excitement. You have a remarkable eye, Mrs. Butler. Just like your father. While Helen provided the intellectual firepower, Declan began moving the larger pieces on the chessboard. He didn't want to just expose Sean. He wanted to acquire his assets from the rubble. He started discreetly buying up Sean's corporate debt through shell companies. He opened back-channel communications with other investors in the waterfront project, subtly planting seeds of doubt about Sean's financial stability. He was creating a ring of fire around Sean's empire, ready to be ignited at a single command. The days were intense and purposeful. For the first time in years, Helen felt alive. The fear that had been her constant companion was replaced by a cold, clear focus. She was no longer Sean's accessory. She was his adversary. She ate, slept, and breathed his downfall. One evening, as she was poring over digital scans of pigment samples Dr. Beck had sourced, Declan entered the study with 2 glasses of wine. You should take a break, he said, his voice softer than she was used to hearing. She looked up, rubbing her tired eyes. I can't. We're close. Dr. Beck found a record of a master forger, a man named Jean-Paul Dubois, who was operating out of Switzerland during the war. He specialized in impressionists. It all fits. Declan handed her the glass. It will still be there in the morning. Patricia has drawn up the official whistleblower complaint for the SEC. Miles has traced the wire transfers for the bribes to 3 offshore accounts. Dr. Beck is preparing his official report on the likely forgery of the Degas. All the pieces are in place, Helen. Thanks to you. She took a sip of the wine, its rich flavor a welcome sensation. He thinks I'm at a spa in Arizona. That's what he's told everyone, that I had a nervous breakdown after the gala and needed to recover. Let him think that Declan said his gaze steady. Let him feel safe in his lies. The lion is most vulnerable when it's sleeping in its own den. Helen looked around the study at the charts on the wall, the open laptops, the legal documents stacked neatly on the table. This was her new reality. A world of strategy and consequence, a world where her knowledge was her power. Thank you, Declan, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. You didn't have to do any of this. Yes, I did, he replied simply. Your father taught me that men like Sean Butler, men who build their thrones on deceit and cruelty, cannot be allowed to stand. It's not just about business. It's about balance. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the unspoken trauma of the gala hanging between them, but also the shared purpose of the coming storm. The net had been woven its threads, a complex mixture of financial forensics art history and a burning desire for justice. All that was left was to pull it tight. The stage for Sean's downfall was set for the following Tuesday, exactly 1 week after the gala. The event was the quarterly board meeting of Butler Holdings, held in the company's opulent 50th floor boardroom. It was Sean's temple, a space designed to project power and invincibility, with a single massive mahogany table and panoramic views of the city he believed he owned. The plan was a multi-pronged, synchronized assault. At 9:00 a.m., as Sean was preparing for his meeting, Patricia Chen would file her comprehensive report with the Securities and Exchange Commission, detailing the bribery and fraud, with Miles's forensic accounting as irrefutable proof. At 9:05 a.m., Dr. Alistair Beck's explosive report on the Degas forgery, co-signed by 2 other leading art authenticators, would be delivered via secured courier to Robert Lanning, the CEO of Sterling Mutual Bank. At 9:10 a.m., an award-winning investigative journalist from the Wall Street Journal, with whom Declan had a long-standing relationship built on trusted leaks, would publish a meticulously detailed exposé on Sean's fraudulent practices, citing anonymous but high-level sources. The final and most crucial piece of the plan was Helen herself. That morning, she stood before a mirror in Declan's penthouse. She was not dressed in the soft, elegant clothes she had worn for the past week. She was wearing a sharply tailored dark grey power suit, her hair pulled back in a severe professional style. Her face was pale, but her eyes were like granite. She was no longer Helen Butler, the victim. She was Helen Finch, her father's daughter, an avenging angel in bespoke tailoring. Declan entered the room holding a tablet. It's time. The article just went live. Helen took a deep breath. Let's begin. In the Butler Holdings boardroom, Sean was at his most arrogant. He was basking in the glow of the Tanaka deal, his board members hanging on his every word as he outlined his vision for the company's future. His phone and the phones of his board members had been placed in a basket at the entrance to ensure no interruptions, a standard procedure that would today prove to be his undoing. At precisely 9:15 a.m., The double doors to the boardroom swung open. Sean looked up, his face contorting in annoyance. I said no interruptions. His personal assistant stood there, pale and trembling. Sir, you have visitors. They insist. Through the doors walked two men in dark suits, their faces grim and official. They flashed their badges. SEC Enforcement Division. The lead agent said, his voice booming in the suddenly silent room. Sean Butler. This boardroom is now a sealed location. Nobody leaves. All electronic devices are to be surrendered. Sean shot to his feet, his face turning a blotchy red. On what grounds? This is outrageous. As if in answer, the doors opened again. This time, it was Robert Lanning from the bank, flanked by his legal team. His face was a mask of cold fury. Butler Lanning snarled, throwing a file folder onto the polished table. It skidded to a stop in front of Sean. My bank is officially calling in your $200 million loan, effective immediately due to fraudulent misrepresentation of collateral. You have 24 hours to produce the funds, or we begin asset seizure. Sean was reeling, utterly blindsided. SEC. The bank. His mind couldn't process the speed of the attack. He looked around at his board members, who were staring at him with expressions of dawning horror. And then the final blow. The doors opened one last time. Helen walked in. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floor. She didn't look like a woman who had just returned from a spa retreat for a nervous breakdown. She looked like a general taking the field of battle. Declan Reese walked in behind her, not as a savior, but as a silent, powerful ally. His presence alone sending a shockwave through the room. Sean stared at her, his mouth agape. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, pasty white. He looked at her, then at Declan, and the full scope of the conspiracy, the sheer, terrifying brilliance of the trap, finally crashed down upon him. You, he whispered, his voice, a choked, strangled sound. Helen stopped at the far end of the long table, directly opposite her husband. She was no longer in his shadow. She was his equal, his opposite. His end. Hello, Sean, she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the silent room. Did you enjoy the party? The board members were now frantically retrieving their phones, their screens lighting up with the damning Wall Street Journal headline, The House of Butler, a billion-dollar empire of fraud. Sean's carefully constructed world was not just cracking, it was being vaporized in real time. He was surrounded, exposed, and utterly defeated. His gaze fixed on Helen, his eyes burning with a desperate, pathetic hatred. I'll destroy you, he seethed, taking a step toward her. Before he could take another, Declan's security chief, Ben, materialized at his side, his hand subtly resting on Sean's arm, a silent, immovable barrier. Helen didn't even flinch. She looked at the pathetic, crumbling man who had terrorized her for years, and she felt nothing but a cold, clean sense of finality. No, Sean, she said, her voice echoing with the authority she had just reclaimed. You're wrong. You see, you can't destroy something that's already been burned to the ground and rebuilt itself from the ashes. I know what that's like. And now so will you. She turned her back on him, a final, symbolic act of dismissal. She had faced her monster, and she had not just won. She had annihilated him. The aftermath was a swift and brutal corporate execution. With the SEC freezing his assets and the bank seizing the collateral on his fraudulent loan, Sean Butler's empire imploded with astonishing speed. The waterfront project collapsed, taking his network of corrupt city officials with it. His board members resigned en masse, scrambling to distance themselves from the ensuing scandal. By the end of the week, Butler Holdings was a hollowed-out shell, picked apart by creditors and federal investigators. Sean himself was arrested, led out of his sterile mansion in handcuffs, a final humiliating image splashed across every news outlet. The charges were extensive: bank fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy bribery. The man who had locked his wife in a dark room to protect his reputation now found himself in a far smaller, colder cell, his name forever synonymous with disgrace. Helen watched it all unfold from a distance. She didn't revel in his suffering. Her victory wasn't about vengeance, it was about reclamation. She had reclaimed her name, her freedom, and her voice. She filed for divorce, the proceedings of which were swift and uncontested. She relinquished any claim to his fraudulent fortune, wanting nothing that was tainted by his lies. She had her own family trust, which Patricia Chen helped her place under her sole ironclad control. In the weeks that followed, she began to build a new life, not on the ashes of Sean's empire, but on the solid foundation of her own identity. She established the Alistair Finch Foundation for Art Preservation, an organization dedicated to helping museums authenticate their collections and expose forgeries. Her expertise, once a private passion dismissed by her husband, was now her public strength. The story of the forged Degas became a quiet legend in the art world, and Helen Finch was suddenly one of its most respected new voices. She and Declan settled into a new, undefined relationship. It was not a whirlwind romance born from trauma, but something quieter, deeper. A partnership built on mutual respect and a shared understanding of the darkness that can hide behind a gilded facade. He gave her space to heal and grow, acting as a trusted advisor and a steadfast friend. He was a presence in her life, not a center of gravity. Helen was her own center now. One crisp autumn evening, a month after the unveiling, Declan joined her at a gallery opening the first public event she had attended since the gala. She was surrounded by people who were listening to her, not because she was a billionaire's wife, but because of what she had to say. She was animated, passionate, and completely at ease. The profound sadness that Declan had once seen in her eyes was gone, replaced by a bright, confident light. As the evening wound down, they walked together along the Chicago River, the city lights dancing on the water. "You seem happy," Declan said, his hands in his pockets. She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. "I feel balanced," she replied, echoing the word he had used in his study that first night. "For years I lived in a world of curated perfection, and none of it was real. Now everything is real. The challenges, the work, the freedom. It's all mine." She stopped and looked out at the skyline, at the glittering towers that represented so much ambition and power. Among them stood the nearly completed shell of the Butler Tower, its future uncertain, a dark monument to a fallen king. It no longer held any power over her. It was just a building. "What will you do now?" Declan asked. Helen looked at him, her expression thoughtful and filled with possibility. "Whatever I want." It was the simplest of answers, and the most powerful. She was not a character in someone else's story anymore. She was the author of her own, and the first chapter was finally truly beginning. The story of Helen Butler is a stark reminder that the most opulent cages are still cages. It's a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about the power you marry into, but the power you find within yourself when everything is stripped away. She was buried in darkness, but instead of being extinguished, she learned to create her own light. Her journey from a silent victim to the architect of justice shows that the most formidable weapon against a bully is a sharp mind and an unbreakable will. If this story of resilience, strategy, and ultimate triumph resonated with you, please hit the like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own inner strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas where the silenced find their voice and the powerful finally face their reckoning. Thank you for listening.